Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris,
And my name is James.
and we are the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One. Now, obviously, we're in a very different setting. One, because both of us are together, which is exciting, but also we're in the comfort of the great outdoors. I thought it'd be a great idea because it's nice outside where we live. It's like beautiful, and what better backdrop than nature?
Yeah, it's a lovely day. It's a great evening. It's nice having Formula One back in our time zone in Eastern time,
Yeah.
which is always nice. First it was Miami, now it's Canada.
Yep.
So we can get right into a fabulous Canadian Grand Prix. And I have to say first, it's just so good to be back in Canada for the
Yes.
first time since 2019.
It is really nice.
It's really nice, and it did not disappoint.
No, definitely did not. Definitely did not disappoint. Saw some really great racing, and had it was just like the whole weekend was just nice. We got a combination of everything. Really great racing. Weather was thrown in the mix. It was just overall a great weekend.
Yeah,
great weekend.
Yeah, it was great. So we'll go ahead and get right into our race takeaways. But the first thing that I just wanted to kind of talk about was the last time that we were in Canada, 2019.
A lot was different about F1.
Yeah, Formula One was different. So it started with, the championship protagonists were Mercedes and Ferrari, and slightly Red Bull, but they were still dealing with some car that was hard to drive. Max Verstappen was doing very well, but Pierre Gasly was in Red Bull.
Pierre Gasly was the Red Bull driver.
I think in that race, Max started third and Pierre Gasly started seventh. I want to say
something like that.
So yeah, it was definitely challenging for Red Bull back then. We had not seen any like combination or like anything regarding the new regulations that we're currently racing in that were back then scheduled to come out for 2021.
Yeah,
and we hadn't even seen like the first model that Formula One presented to the teams was in Austin in October.
Yeah.
So it was still all conceptual back then. Sebastian Vettel was racing for Ferrari.
Still at Ferrari.
Crossed the line in first, got second from the infamous 5-second time penalty.
Yeah.
So a lot was different back in Canada.
Haas was still sponsored by Rich Energy.
Yep.
Which good memories there. AlphaTauri was still Toro Rosso
and
with
had
the best livery.
The best livery in Formula One.
That electric blue
in existence.
It was just electric blue, silver with a little hint of red. Oh, that was one of the best liveries in Formula One.
I think my favorite.
Yeah.
But that's an episode for another day.
That and the Vodafone
Mercedes, McLaren Mercedes.
That was a good one too.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get right into the race. The biggest thing that we have to really talk about was the fact that
qualifying.
Everybody was out of, like, almost 2/3 of the grid was out of position because of qualifying.
Yeah, which I thought, having qualifying in the rain, I knew it was going to make it exciting, and I knew there were going to be quite a few drivers who were out of place, because we saw that in Belgium last year. Granted, we didn't end up really having a race, but with qualifying, we saw last year in Belgium that quite a few drivers were out of place. George Russell almost put his car on pole in a Williams, along with a slew of other drivers that were in Q3 that weren't regularly in Q3, or were knocked out in Q1 who weren't regularly knocked out in Q1. And that was definitely the case that we saw in Canada this weekend, which made for a really exciting race today.
Yeah, it saw Fernando Alonso starting on the front row, which I imagine the only people in Formula One that were not excited to see that were Lewis Hamilton
fans. Yeah.
But it was so great to see Fernando Alonso back up on the front row. And that's just kind of Fernando Alonso's MO, getting way more out of a car that doesn't deserve to be where it is and putting it where it shouldn't be. He did that with Ferrari pretty much the entire time he was there.
Yeah.
So it was really good to see. Fernando up there. We had both of the Haas's, P5 and P6, which we'll talk about Haas in a minute. And it saw Sergio Perez qualify 13th after a wreck. So a lot of people out of position. Charles Leclerc and Yuki Tsunoda starting from the back because of engine penalties, which whenever there's a wet qualifying or wet anything involving the race or qualifying, it's always going to be really good. And it did not disappoint. And I think set up a brilliant race. One of my favorite Canadian Grand Prix in recent memory. You'd have to go back to 2011 for
a 4-hour race.
My favorite Canadian Grand Prix.
That was a really good one. And that was actually, that race was the race that after that race, they created the rule that a race can only happen in a certain window because that race lasted for 4 hours. It was a 4-hour race.
So now essentially the rule is, and this is why when we were in
Monaco.
Monaco, we had a timed race because it has to take place. A race has to take place in 2 hours within a 4-hour window. So that's why Monaco ended up being a timed race. But yeah, great. First major takeaway and question that I have is, should Red Bull be concerned about Perez's engine failure? Because we know the start of the season was really rocky for them. They've had a really great run of form, but is this maybe some reliability creeping back in?
I'm hesitant to say that, yes, oh my gosh, we have to be concerned because it's one little problem that they've had after being nearly perfect since Saudi Arabia, really, Australia, since Australia. I'm hesitant to say yes that we should be concerned, but it definitely is like, okay, maybe they're not totally out of the woods. Maybe they're that string of really great races that they've had with reliability isn't necessarily going to continue that way. But I think it's too early to say, oh my gosh, everyone should be concerned. Hold the phone. Everyone should be nervous right now. Because if I would say next race in Great Britain, when they race in Silverstone, if one of their cars has another reliability issue that has them to retire, then I would say, yeah, okay, maybe they're not as invincible as they've shown over the past couple races, the past like 5 or 6 races. Maybe there should be a little bit of concern because we've seen how fast the tables can turn. Ferrari looked like the juggernauts at the beginning of the season, and no one was going to touch Ferrari. And now look where we're at.
Yeah. They're
almost third in the constructors. Their top driver is third in the drivers' championship. So a lot can change. I don't think they should be too concerned, but maybe a little bit nervous. A little nervous.
I know when Crofty was talking to Christian Horner on the pit wall after that happened, he didn't sound too concerned about it. Just very cool and calm. Like, yeah, we just need to take it back and, we need to look into it and we'll figure it out. But they didn't seem really too worried about it. The biggest concern is now that this is Perez's second failure of some kind. This is now, it's going to be both Red Bulls along with now both Ferraris that are going to at some point have to take an engine penalty. And Leclerc has already taken an engine penalty. So this is definitely something that I think will affect them much later in the season.
Yes.
And going back to your point of like the first one, you don't really need to be concerned. It's after if it happens again. I mean, we saw that when Charles Leclerc's engine let go in Spain, it was kind of like, yeah, they're a reliable team. So, they'll pick up the pieces.
Yeah.
And then
the very next
four of their 6 powered teams in Azerbaijan retired. So that's when you enter panic mode. So, I agree that it's definitely something to look at. but they don't need to enter into panic mode yet. I think if they entered into panic mode right now, they would make really poor strategic decisions with their engines.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know, they're only allotted a certain amount of power unit components throughout a season. So if you have to use more than the allotted, each component more than your allotted amount is a 10-place grid penalty. Charles Leclerc replaced almost all of his, and 4 of them he had to take an engine penalty on. So technically, Charles Leclerc had a 40-place grid penalty, which is why he started where he started.
Yeah.
So kind of on that similar vein, what do we think about, Mick Schumacher also had a failure, had an engine failure. Is that something that Ferrari needs to be concerned about, or is that just a little bit of hangover from Baku?
I think in my personal, and this is where the case is a little bit different from Red Bull. I think that's maybe just a little bit of hangover from Baku. I don't think Ferrari should necessarily be nervous about Mick's retirement, because at least on Mick's car, that was the first time that he's retired due to an engine failure. All the other times have been because he's, had an accident. So in the case of Mick, differently from Red Bull, I think they really shouldn't be too worried about that. I think it's a little bit of hangover from Baku, and I know they're bringing in a slew of upgrades to Silverstone that are most likely going to counteract what is happening with the Ferrari power unit. So I don't think they should really be too nervous about that.
The pervading theory, because Ferrari has been very tight-lipped about the nature of its reliability issues, but the pervading theory is that it's just a batch of bad parts on the upgrade. So we are expecting that Ferrari, they have said previously this season that they're bringing upgrades, primarily aero upgrades to Silverstone, but I'm wondering if they're upgrades to the parts that, have been giving them troubles. So we'll see when we go to England in 2 weeks. Now, both of those retirements triggered 2 virtual safety cars, and then Yuki Tsunoda's crash triggered a safety car that completely shook up the strategy. It was, everybody said that it was going to be an easy one stop, but we had a lot of differences in strategies, a lot of things, a lot of drivers taking advantages of it in different ways. And that created a really, really interesting race at the very end.
Yeah. And what was cool to me is the strategies with tire seemed different than, your fairly straightforward races that we see. So there was a lot of variation in tire strategies when drivers were changing tires, who was going long. Some drivers were going long on mediums, some drivers were going short on long on hards. And so it created a wide variety of strategies, which is not something that you see very often, which was cool. And the virtual safety cars in the safety car, the one safety car that we had definitely helps with that, which made it even more interesting, which was good. So I thought that was really nice. But Mercedes, I have to say, Mercedes very much looked, or that made no sense. Mercedes looked very solid today, finishing both 3rd and 4th, with Lewis getting a very, very well-deserved podium. George finishing 4th. Mercedes have definitely solidified themselves as the 3rd fastest team, which is fantastic, because everyone was like, wow, they're going to be like 6th place after Bahrain, and especially after winter testing. Goodness gracious. But they definitely are, the 3rd fastest team, and that was really, really cool to see them do so well in Canada. And I think they were playing around with Lewis's setups, and I think they finally started getting Lewis on Lewis's setups on the right track to figure out how the car drives and all that stuff, which is great. Yeah, great to see.
So essentially, what Mercedes has been doing George has been taking one setup, and Lewis has been going in a different direction in setup. So they've been putting 2 different setups on the car, going in different directions, just to try and cover their bases to figure out how the car works, because they know when the car is fast, but they don't know how it gets there yet. And they put I think this weekend was the first weekend where Hamilton used Russell's setup,
And they were both on the same setup.
and they were both on the same setup, or it was closer to Russell's setup, and Lewis, for the first time this entire season since Bahrain, ended a race ahead of George Russell. George Russell has finished ahead of Lewis Hamilton in every single race since Bahrain. So this is the first time since Bahrain, and great podium. Yeah, I think they're definitely much more on the pace. I think if Ferrari cannot get on top of their reliability issues, I think Mercedes might even be able to challenge for second.
Yeah,
because they have been the second fastest team when Ferrari's not in the picture.
Yeah.
They have been.
And so far, I think Mercedes have actually been the most reliable team with their engine. I don't think they haven't had a single mechanical failure DNF this entire season.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of would probably be early thing. I think Nico Hülkenberg retired.
Well, I'm talking about just this season.
I know. Nico Hülkenberg in either Bahrain or Saudi Arabia, one of the two, when he was subbing in for Sebastian Vettel. I think he had a mechanical failure.
Mercedes engine,
But yeah, those Mercedes power units have definitely been the most reliable of the four for sure. So they're always there when they're picking up the pieces for Ferrari. So might at the end of the season might even be in contention for second place
if Ferrari can't figure out this reliability. Because if Ferrari can figure out this reliability issue, I think they're Ferrari and Red Bull are just going to be light years ahead of Mercedes. But I also want to point out, and that kind of like my last takeaway is Zhou Guanyu, after a very disappointing Baku, and has had a string of hard luck the past couple races, put on a great drive. Both Alfa Romeos finished in the points, and especially Zhou Guanyu, I think he finished ahead of Valtteri. So it was a really, really super awesome drive by him.
Yeah, and aside just from finishing position, and he qualified really well. He made it into Q3. He qualified 10th, made it into Q3 for the first time. He was also getting his elbows out. He was trying to, he had a really, really long battle with Lance Stroll there for a while, and he was getting his elbows out. He was starting to do some different things. His season so far has kind of reminded me of Yuki Tsunoda's season last year.
Very
started really strong, has taken kind of a dip, and the retirement in Baku was a little bit unfortunate because he was running really well. But I think after the frustration of Baku, I think this was a good weekend for not only just him, but Alfa Romeo in general to bounce back, because Valtteri Bottas has also just had a run of some disappointing races. So yeah, great from Zhou Guanyu to get back up into the points. Double points for Alfa Romeo this weekend. So yeah, great all around. And yeah, just great to be back in Canada.
Yes.
For first time since 2019.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go into our next segment, our weekly top 10. So again, with this, anything goes for our weekly top 10, anything goes. And actually we've got quite a variety of things for you this weekend. So we'll kick it off, our weekly top 10, with 10th place. We have Mr. Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first times that we've mentioned him in, if I'm not mistaken, the first time that we've mentioned him in our weekly top 10.
Yeah, if it's not involved with, connected with, S-Men as a team.
Yeah.
It's solely Fernando Alonso.
This is the first time that just Fernando Alonso has made our top 10. Great weekend. I think especially the highlight of the weekend for him was qualifying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Was a fantastic thing. Again, like we covered before, everybody loved to see that. But
except maybe Lewis Hamilton fans.
Yeah. I think the reason why I hesitate to put him higher is obviously he's always going to be limited by the car. But he definitely, struggled at times keeping Carlos Sainz behind him, Lewis Hamilton behind him. Just kind of
Even his
through
teammate.
through the course of just pit strategies, just kind of ended up further back, and then at the very end of the race, of course, no fault of his own, ended up having a little bit of an engine problem that they were having to manage. So he was just kind of managing the gap, lifting and coasting. Couldn't really do a whole lot. So 10th place for Fernando.
Yep. Very good drive. Very good weekend for him overall. So in ninth place, we have Lance Stroll.
Yep, another first time in our weekly top 10.
Yeah, Lance, and he's another driver who's had a lot of tough luck this season, and we've also been very critical of Lance Stroll this season as well. But he had a really strong race today. He also finished in the points. So finished in the points. Really solid race for him. Because we know how much that car is struggling.
Yeah, especially starting 18th, where he started, made it all the way up into the points.
Yeah.
It's a drive from him that we have not seen pretty much at all this season.
Yeah.
And what a way to do it in front of your home crowd,
Yeah. Really.
Him and, he has a grandstand at the track. Great for him to do that in front of his home crowd. Really just good. It was a very quiet drive other than the battle with Guan Yu Zhou, which he did a mega job defending against him. We didn't really hear a whole lot from him, and just, was quietly just kind of picking people off. And, I think Aston Martin, just in general, had a really good strategy. They capitalized when they needed to and ended up really on a really solid strategy. Saw Lance Stroll getting the points.
Yeah. So next up in 8th place, we have Mr. Mick Schumacher, which unfortunately retired from the race. But the reason why we have him in 8th place is because he was running very, very strong in the points and was looking like he was going to be able to finish in the points. But unfortunately, his engine decided to go kaput. So
yeah,
unfortunately,
it was not a great race for him, obviously, because he didn't finish it. But he qualified well. He looked like up until the very last minute that he probably was even going to out qualify Kevin Magnussen. But ended up P6 in qualifying, which was really good. Was having a great race. The Haas's were never going to stay up, in contention for top 5. But it was looking like he might have been on for points. Was having a really great drive, a reliable drive. He was getting on with it. And unfortunately, it was a mechanical problem, no fault to his own.
Yeah, but really, and overall, a great weekend from him, not just from in the race, but overall, really, really great weekend from him. All right, in 7th place, we have Esteban Ocon.
P6.
Yeah.
P6 at the line. Really great drive. Ended up, being faster than Fernando on the race. I think towards the end, Fernando probably had fresher tires, but Alpine pulled a little bit team orders when they were managing Fernando's power unit issue, but ended up P6. And I tell you what, I think Alpine is really starting to be the star of the midfield.
Yeah.
I don't think we talked about it a little bit last time that, we mentioned AlphaTauri in there, but AlphaTauri has been having some issues, and we'll get onto that later in this episode. But, Alpine has really become the star of the midfield, reliable, lots of more double points weekends than not.
Yeah.
This season.
Yeah.
And that's capped off by a great P6 from Esteban Ocon. Finished up best of the rest today.
Yeah. All right. In 6th place, we have, as a team, Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it before. Just a great,
really strong weekend
after a lot of disappointment. Lots of DNFs, some reliability issues. We do know that Guan Yu Zhou's retirement in Baku, Fred Vasseur confirmed that was an exhaust failure. So that was a Sauber problem, not a Ferrari power unit problem, which is which is good. It's, should be a little bit of a relief for Ferrari, but after some disappointing weekends for Zhou and for Bottas, great to see them, another double points weekend for them.
Yeah, it was a really solid weekend for them, which was good because they've had some hard luck in the past. All right, in fifth place, this is where the no rules is applied, but overall, in fifth place for our weekly top 10, we have just the race weekend in general. We saw a lot of different things happen. Like it had everything. Really great racing. Qualifying, which was wild to say the least, and it was raining. So we had weather was a factor. Overall, made for a very, very exciting weekend and a really great weekend. First weekend back in Canada since the pandemic. So
yeah, Canada, it's always a really interesting race weekend. It's always been really hard to overtake at that track. I remember at the race in 2019. It was tough to overtake, and after the start it just kind of maintained after that, and we really didn't get a whole lot of action until Sebastian Vettel's moment through turn 3 and 4 chicane. But I think this is also just another positive moment for the new regulations. It's proving much better, I think, much easier to follow. And I think that's a combination of the regulations and the 18-inch, the low profile tires, the 18-inch rim, low profile tires, less heat sensitive when you're following that close. I think any overheating problem in the tires has literally just come from the temperature on the track, and not from following. So the cars can follow really well. Still a little bit of a problem for overtaking. Still definitely need DRS assistance, but
we were seeing battles throughout the race that were like 4 or 5 cars, and they were all nose to tail, 4 or 5 cars, and that's something that we've never seen in Formula One in the previous era with the V6 turbo hybrid. We haven't really seen that.
Right.
You saw it maybe a little bit in the blown diffuser era, but not to the extent that we have it now, which was awesome to see. So it made for a really great weekend overall.
I remember in the previous era, you would get into DRS range and you'd be waiting for DRS, but you've been waiting for DRS for so long. By the time you get it, you burn out your tires and you have to maintain. And then that's probably the only overtake that you're going to make until you are able to put a fresh set of tires on. So yeah, definitely just overall much improvement on the racing. And it's, the fans in Canada are incredible. Just, in general, great to be back in Canada.
Yep. In fourth place, we have Mr. Carlos Sainz. Really, really great race from him. Started third, ended up second. The reason why I think the reason why we didn't have him higher is because other than like the last 15 laps, of the race, it was very quiet for him. I mean, he was leading quite a bit, but I think also why we put him higher than some of the other is because even though he had a very quiet race, or relatively quiet race, he was able to stick with Max for quite a while, which we haven't really seen him be able to do it all this season, which was really, really nice to see.
For sure.
And, it looked like he, is starting to get some of his confidence back after the string of DNFs and spins and accidents and stuff that he's had this season. So it was a really, really great race for him. Also, I mean, the people who we have in the top 3, I mean, hard to compete with that.
Yeah,
but
it's definitely being P4 for Carlos is not a measure of being the 4th best person of the day. It's more of the yardstick kind of moved a little bit.
Yeah.
And I have to say that this was a season drive for Carlos Sainz. It's definitely the best he's looked all season. Really reliable, was able to pressure Max, the entire way through the last phase of the race
Mhm.
after the safety car.
And I really think had the race been like maybe 5 more laps, I think he could have gotten an overtake and passed Verstappen. So it was a really, really great drive from him. It's just who we have in the top 3. It's hard to compete with who we have in the top 3.
Mhm.
Speaking of the top 3, let's go on to third place. In third place, the first of the 3 podium positions for our weekly top 10 that we have as a team, Mercedes.
Great weekend for them.
Great run for them. And they were not at the end of the race, they were not too far off from the leaders.
Mhm.
Being both in third and fourth, they were not too, I mean, granted, Max and Carlos were driving really, really hard at the end and they pulled away a little bit, but they were much, much closer as a team to the leaders than I think they have been all season long.
Yeah. And once, and at the very end, once Leclerc cleared both of the Alpines of Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon, George Russell, I think, ended up probably about 2.5, 3 seconds ahead. And Leclerc was not able to close in on that gap. So Mercedes just had really, really good pace. I think they were on a little bit fresher tires at the very end.
Yeah.
But Leclerc was not able to close that gap. I think the Mercedes ended up on mediums at the very end, pitted under safety car. Leclerc stayed out.
Yeah.
After he pitted for his set of mediums, so they were on fresher tires. But yeah, just in general, really good. They've had an upturn in form, and I think this is definitely, they have a major upgrade planned for Great Britain in 2 weeks, which is perfect for them. So I think they have to definitely feel like they're on the up and up. They should definitely feel good about their results. And this is another, Baku is really great for them. We have to, Canada was really, really good for them. So definitely going to be interesting to see how they progress, but they have to feel good at where they're at. I think there's still a little bit to go because they still don't quite know why they're fast or why they're fast at certain times and slower at other times.
Yeah, they're still figuring that stuff out.
Any time where you're fast, where you have a weekend like this, that's definitely going to be points in the knowledge bag for you. And that's definitely a lot learned and a lot that they can take away from this weekend.
Yes. In second place, we have Mr. Charles Leclerc. And I have to say, no, he did not finish. He did not get a podium. He finished 5th, which if you look on paper with where everyone finished, you're like, well, why didn't you have Charles in 5th? But remember, he started 19th and finished 5th.
Yeah.
I think he could have, what's preventing us from putting him at like the top spot is, he was stuck behind Esteban a little bit for quite a while actually, and couldn't get around him, was struggling a little bit there. I think had he made the move on Esteban, was able to get around him and kind of pull away from him, he very easily, and didn't have that slow pit stop. They had a slow pit stop in there too. I think he definitely could have gotten a podium, which I think had he gotten a podium, he would have easily been first place. But still, incredible drive from him.
Yeah, made some really good overtakes.
Yes, made some really great overtakes. And that looked like a champion drive from Charles.
Yeah, it was definitely as much damage limitation as Ferrari could expect on the weekend. I think too, him getting stuck behind Esteban Ocon was a little bit too a limitation of the strategy, because he had to go really long on those hard tires. And so he just, and you saw it, he had no grip in the rear tires. So he would get close really fast on Esteban Ocon, like especially on under braking at the turn 10 hairpin, he would close up to Esteban Ocon really quickly. But on the exit, Ocon would just shoot away because Leclerc had just to be much more delicate on the throttle.
Yeah.
So, he was struggling with rear grip a little bit. So definitely, I think that was a little more of a limitation from the tires. I think the slow pit stop was also what put him behind the DRS train of Tsunoda. It was like Tsunoda, Ricardo, came out ahead of Vettel, had to get through Zhou and Stroll as well. So that whole DRS train he ended up behind because of the slow pit stop.
Yeah.
But he made it through brilliantly, made those overtakes when he needed to, made some really good overtakes. The overtake that he had on Esteban Ocon going into the hairpin, sold him the dummy going to the outside and then darted down to the inside, was really, really good. And, I think Ferrari, they came away with a tone of disappointment from the weekend, but when you have your driver starting 19th,
I'd say it was pretty good.
It's a pretty good weekend.
I know they would have loved one of their drivers to be on the top step, but I think it was a really great weekend. And Ferrari as a whole should feel very good about this weekend going into Silverstone. Now, in first place, the only driver that we haven't talked about, well, not the only driver, but one of the drivers we haven't talked about who won the race, Mr. Max Verstappen. You can't have a better weekend than Max.
Ice in his veins. He was under immense pressure from Carlos Sainz after the safety car, and just never even, he was calm, he was collected. It was very reminiscent of Kimi Räikkönen, just a very under lots of pressure, head down, cool, calm, and collected. You didn't see any erratic driving that we've seen from the past with him. Didn't look like he was losing his head. Just very cool, calm, and collected. And after the race, he said that he enjoyed his battle with Carlos and really enjoyed that last phase of the race. Just was completely calm. And he's on a completely different level from everybody else in the field right now. And just very Kimi Räikkönen-esque, just ice in his veins, cool, calm, and collected.
Maybe the new Iceman.
Yeah, just
used to be the complete opposite, but
yes, and this is just, I think that too is also a result of the fact that I really do think his championship battle with Lewis Hamilton matured him a lot.
Yeah.
Because towards the end of that battle, when you could see it was slipping from his grasp, he started to lose his cool a little bit. And I think that matured him a lot. I think he learned a lot from last season, and he's driving on a completely different level than what we've seen.
Yeah. So congratulations, Max Verstappen. You are the winner of the Formula One Bros weekly top 10. So congratulations, Max Verstappen. We'll go on to our next segment. Biggest winners and biggest losers of the weekend. We're going to start off with our biggest losers first. So Chris, who are some of your biggest losers for the weekend? Because we have very similar.
Yeah, you can't talk about biggest losers and not talk about Haas.
Oh yeah,
they were
probably the biggest loser of the weekend.
Starting P5 and P6, Mick Schumacher didn't see the checkered flag, and Kevin Magnussen was P17.
Yeah,
which we should talk about Kevin Magnussen P17 because on the opening lap, he was challenging Lewis Hamilton for 4th place.
Yes,
and there was a little bit of contact, damage to his front wing, which I will say, I think the front wings this year, because it's all one element, are much more sturdy. We're seeing a lot less wing damage, very fragile wing damage. It's all one element. So, just in general, we're seeing this less and less often.
Yeah.
But just had some wing damage. The end plate was just kind of hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
And, the FIA gave him the black and orange flag. So he was forced to come in and pit. That put him off strategy. It put him at the back behind Latifi and couldn't do much more, couldn't do much else. Finished P17. He was last on the road and was just kind of relegated to the back and had a really, really anonymous race from there, which is really disappointing because,
he's had some really great drives this year.
Yeah, he's had some really great drives, and Kevin Magnussen is just so good. He puts in really great. He was always the person at Haas in the past before he left that would pick up the points when points weren't possible. Like in 2020, was the only driver at Haas to score points. And that was in Hungary, scored the one. So just, he is always known for those really, really great drives and just couldn't get it done. And unfortunately, it was to no fault of his own. But on a weekend where it looked like Haas was on for some points, walked away with nothing.
Yeah. So close to looking like a bunch of legends instead of a bunch of wankers, but unfortunately.
Yeah. And on a very similar note, AlphaTauri.
Yes. Yeah. Also, with Yuki Tsunoda retiring, and that, to be quite honest, was a very silly mistake that Yuki made. And at least this year, rather uncharacteristic.
Yes. If you had told me that had happened in his rookie season,
yeah,
it'd be a little bit more believable.
Yeah,
but
a lot more believable.
We haven't seen Yuki Tsunoda make that kind of high profile mistake this season very often. It has happened, but not as often.
Yeah.
So that was really unfortunate. And the reason why Pierre Gasly ended up where he was is because he, from the very beginning of the race, they were managing a power unit problem. And from pretty much like lap 10, his team was telling him, use a lot of lift and coast. They were managing a problem with his car. I don't know if it was a brake problem or a power unit problem or what it was.
Yeah, and that wasn't just from the race. That had been happening throughout qualifying and throughout the weekend too. So.
Yeah, so definitely, not a strong weekend from AlphaTauri. Yeah. Definitely one that they want to move on from. With Yuki Tsunoda starting from the back, they tried to put him on a different strategy and try something different. But, when you don't see the checkered flag, that kind of.
Speaking of not seeing the checkered flag, I'm also going to throw Sergio Perez into that pot.
Yeah, we haven't talked about him yet a lot this episode.
Especially, I don't think we've talked really much about him other than maybe at Bahrain when there's that double DNF. Unfortunate for Sergio Perez. And it was an unfortunate weekend with qualifying. Did not have a good qualified P13, ended up crashing. And then had to retire from the race. So really, really not a great weekend for Checo.
We've seen this with Sergio Perez. When he qualifies in the wet, he's not a good wet qualifier. In Turkey, I remember Turkey in 2020 when Lance Stroll won pole position, he ended up, I think, like P17.
Yeah.
Which for the Racing Point that year was very uncharacteristic
on both ends of the spectrum.
on both ends of the spectrum, but was at that point in the season when they were getting ready to go back to the Middle East and they had a string of podiums, that was really uncharacteristic. So we know Sergio Perez is not the best wet qualifier, and I think he would have made it into Q3 had he not crashed in Q2, and he just wasn't able to get another lap in, and his banker lap was just not good enough because by that point the rain was stopping. And, the track was really starting to ramp up, and his banker lap at the beginning was not good enough for Q3, and then ended it with a power unit failure. So that's definitely a weekend that he's going to want to come back. But, I think qualifying was definitely on him, but I think he definitely could have, much like Charles Leclerc, been a threat at the very end of the race had, with all of the virtual safety cars and the safety car that we got, I think he definitely could have been a threat at the very end of the race if they played the strategy right, but never got to find out. So unfortunately, that's not really due to any fault of his, but it's definitely something that they're going to be wanting to forget when they head overseas to the UK.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to throw someone into the hat, into the hat. And it's weird because we talked about him in our weekly top 10. He was in the weekly top 10, but at least in terms of the race, just the race, because he had a great weekend overall. But Fernando Alonso, I'm gonna say Fernando Alonso is a loser for the race day because he had a wonderful opportunity starting P2. Now, obviously, in an Alpine, was never going to compete for a win or maybe even a podium, but he finished 7th and was struggling with engine problems at the end. Was beat by his teammate.
Yeah,
I think. I'm sure he's probably very grumpy at the fact that he finished P7 and not higher, because he could have. I think he had the opportunity to have fought Lewis and George at the end, but unfortunately, that did not happen. Finished P7. Still a great weekend for Alpine, like consistent points, but so it's kind of like on that cusp. Did really well, but like not quite to say that he was a big winner for the weekend. So
I think that's definitely
think that's
something.
why.
I think that's definitely a race that he's going to definitely be disappointed in after
Yeah.
starting P2. You know, in the very first phase of the race, you know, in the first stint, you know, they were kind of when pit stops were starting happening, he was asking his team what the gap to Hamilton was.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of saw that that's where his race was at the time, was like P4, P5 around there. So he was kind of seeing his race happen there. Could he have been on for a podium? I don't know. But he went really, his team left him out way longer on those mediums than he should have been on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that set him up really, really poorly for the end of the race. Pitted at the wrong time and then had to manage his power unit to the end. So it really unfortunate. So he had a great weekend overall, but yeah, I think that's definitely something that he's going to be remiss about. Kind of on the same note, you know, it looked like for a while it was going to be an okay weekend, but McLaren is definitely going to end up in the losers bracket, mainly just because they tried some stuff in on pit road, and their pit lane, their pit crew was just not on it today.
Yeah, very reminiscent of 2012.
And that left Lando Norris in no man's land.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they almost put the wrong tires on Lando's car. They double stacked. Both of the double stacked pit stops were slow. I think it was the second VSC when they double stacked. They tried to double stack. Both of those pit stops were slow. You know, a mix up with tires just ended up really, really poorly for them. It looked like Daniel Ricciardo was going to be on for points, but couldn't quite get it. I think the drivers around him were just quicker today.
Mm-hmm.
McLaren is definitely still a team that's track to track, you know, depending on where they go, you know, their performance fluctuates. So yeah, definitely something that I think they could have been on for points and wasn't in it today.
Yeah. My last biggest loser, I just have to say, because it's home Grand Prix, Nicholas Latifi, super poor race. It's unfortunate because it was his home Grand Prix, but you know, a string of poor races, yeah, putting together a poor season for him.
Yeah.
And it's definitely coming into question his future in the sport.
Yeah, with the rumor mill abuzz, with his seat particularly being linked to Oscar Piastri, you know, his home Grand Prix, this was a big weekend to make a big impact, and just couldn't get it done. I think Williams is their early season performance, especially at the hands of Alex Albon, has stalled a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they're having the upgrade success that the teams around them, especially the teams at the beginning of the season that were around them, like Aston Martin, have had.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a weekend that could have been for Nicholas Latifi, but couldn't put it together.
Yep.
So, and it's, yeah, not helping him at all.
Nope. All right. Well, we're going to move on to our last segment, our biggest winners of the week. And this should go pretty quickly because a lot of these we've already talked about in our top 10, but Ferrari, definitely a big winner for the weekend, I would say. Now, if you know, on paper, based off of finishing, you know, having a driver finish second and a driver finishing fifth, that's a pretty underwhelming weekend, and a weekend that you would not want as a Ferrari. But considering where they started, 3rd and 19th, I would say it's a pretty dang good weekend for Ferrari. And they were also helped with the Red Bull retirement, making up quite a bit of ground in the Constructors championship with Sergio Perez retiring. So definitely a good weekend for them.
It's only a 4-point swing in the Constructors championship, but that 4 points could come very pivotal at the end of the season. It is still a long season. Yeah, Ferrari definitely damage limitation where it needed to be. I think their situation is still very, very delicate. But I think they're still in a precarious situation. But I think they are definitely, you know, this was definitely damage limitation where it needed to be today. another biggest winner. I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but you have to throw in Mercedes, particularly Lewis Hamilton,
Yes.
being
Great
you know
drive.
the first race since Bahrain that he's outraced George Russell. You know, his second podium of the year, his first coming in Bahrain. So,
And after how he finished in Baku in the physical condition he was in, so really great recovery drive from him.
Yeah, and after qualifying, you know, he qualified P4, finished the race in P3. He looked like he had his jubilant smile back. You know, he was his usual bubbly self. He's a great personality in the paddock, and it was really hard to watch him being so downbeat after Baku, and even after Friday. You know, after Friday, you know, he was overheard, you know, in a video saying, "Man, this car is so bad." But they made a lot of changes on Saturday, qualified really well, raced really well. And at the end of the race, he was smiling. He was on the podium. He was really genuinely happy to be there. Him and Carlos Sainz had a great moment sharing the podium together. Formula One is a much better place when Lewis Hamilton is happy.
Yes,
so it was so good to see him on the top step, or not on the top step, but on the podium. Just classic Lewis Hamilton, great drive from him.
Now this last one, because we've already talked about him in the weekly top 10, but Esteban Ocon, don't need to repeat much else. Great weekend from him.
Best of the rest. Great drive.
Absolutely. So with that, next race is in Silverstone. What are you looking forward to when we go to Silverstone?
Lots of things. Ever since I can remember, you know, the British Grand Prix has always been a fantastic race. It's a high-powered circuit. It's a great racetrack. Lots of great action on it. I think, you know, we've had the previous generation cars threw up some great races at Silverstone. You know, I'm thinking back to 2019 with, you know, the battle between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, the two Mercedes, Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton at the front. There's some great battles in 2020 and 2021 between Red Bull and Mercedes.
In 2020.
Tire drama, the huge drama that was the opening lap of the 2021 Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc almost winning that race. It is the previous generation of cars have thrown up some fantastic races. I think with the new regulations, this British Grand Prix is going to be an absolute banger of a race. And I cannot wait.
Watch, now that we say that, it's going to be like a snooze fest.
I hope not. Because
very, very typical.
That's
Max, Charles, Sergio, Carlos, everything.
I hope not, because it is one of my favorite Grand Prix weekends of the season. It's great. You know, I that's what I'm looking forward to. I you know, we have, you know, Red Bull and Ferrari supposed to be bringing upgrades.
So Ferrari's going to bring some upgrades to Silverstone.
It's going to be great. What are you looking forward to?
I mean, you pretty much covered it. Being back in England, I think it'll be really, really great racing. That track is always fantastic. I want to try to go to that race at some point in my life. But yeah, I think that'll be good. I'll be interested to see if Ferrari is managed to close the gap at all in terms of what they in terms of like upgrades that they're bringing and everything. So
I will say, if Ferrari doesn't take any engine penalties, which they're not supposed to, but if Ferrari doesn't take any engine penalties in Silverstone, and we have another straight up fight between Red Bull and Ferrari for the top spots, I think that is going to make for a fantastic Grand Prix.
I agree.
For sure.
And completely forgot, we've got a couple hot takes for you.
I think we each have one.
Yeah, we each have one. Mine, I'll start. My hot take of the week. You know, it's you know, we've referred to the battle between Ferrari and Red Bull as like a pendulum. I think pendulum is fully mid-swing back to the way of Ferrari. Charles looked excellent today. Carlos looked like Carlos was actually able to keep up with Max. And so I think now the pendulum is fully in swing back to the way of Ferrari. So that's my hot take.
Ferrari have some upgrades come in. Red Bull haven't had any upgrades in a while because they threw a lot of development into the opening season. So is this the development race stalling for Red Bull? We'll see. If Ferrari has a drama-free weekend with their power unit, I think they could be in huge contention. It is a high-powered circuit, but it's very tight and twisty. So I definitely think that Ferrari, especially in the first and second sectors, will have the measure of the Red Bull because they are faster in the curves. So that's definitely something to be keeping an eye on. My hot take, and this is purely to stir up controversy.
We like doing that.
My hot take is Oscar Piastri will be racing in Formula One by the end of the 2022 season.
Well, you heard it here first, folks.
I purely just to cause chaos because that's my favorite thing in the world. But Oscar Piastri will be in Formula One by the end of the 2022 season. There were a lot of rumors that the Canadian Grand Prix was going to be Nicholas Latifi's last.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they would do that.
I don't think they would either.
I think if anything were to happen, they would do a driver change at the summer break.
Because correct me if I think that's what happened both with that's what happened with the switch with Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon happened at the summer break. Usually if a driver, other than, when Max took over in 2016, usually if things like that happen, it usually happens at the season, the summer break. So,
yeah.
But will Oscar, we do have confirmation that Otmar Szafnauer did say Oscar Piastri will be in F1 next year. So we will be welcoming Oscar Piastri to the grid next year.
Even if this is just willing it into existence because he deserves it.
Yeah.
But
who will he be with?
Otmar, it's almost becoming a George Russell to Mercedes kind of thing. Like,
yeah.
Is this really a secret anymore?
Yeah.
I don't know where he's going to go. I don't know when it's going to, well, we know where he's going to go. Mm-hmm. We don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Is it going to be at the end of the season? Is it going to be over the summer break? Is it going to be mid-season? Nobody knows.
Who knows?
But it will happen.
Yes,
by the end of the season, I'm predicting.
Yep. So, lastly, as always, be sure like and subscribe. All of our social media, YouTube at Formula1_bros. So, like and subscribe. Share with your friends. Leave a comment. And we'll be catching you after the race in Silverstone.
Yep. We will see you after our British Grand Prix.